Good evening, folks. We've got a very special presentation for you this evening. If you were joining us just a few minutes ago, you would be aware that our sister Angel and Nick have just entered the Senate building. Tonight, there is a proceeding. It is, bring it up on screen for you guys to see here. Share, share, share. We are going to be covering probably the next 2 hours here. And this is what is going on inside the Senate tonight. It is UNDRIP. So, examine the implementation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. The lady who is representing here, Marjolaine Etienne, president of Quebec Native Women Incorporated. This is not traditional representation. So, Graham and Nancy and the Mohawk elders, so from both West and East, have both requested that Angel and the talking staff of Graham and Nancy be in attendance for this. And we just did a live about 20 minutes ago showing you them in the street with the staff and the Two Row Wampum. And I believe the stream is about to begin here. Yes, it is. We're going to bring this up. So we're just waiting for that to get going there. Just large. We are on standby. I'll mute this for now. While we're waiting here, I'm just going to get UNDRIP up here. We can go over UNDRIP while we're waiting here. Oh, shit. And I just... I just minimized the stream by accident. There we go. Apologize for the little bit of a wait here, but we are right on time. The Senate is not. There we go. Get that back up there. I'll just mute while we're waiting here. While we are waiting, so what is UNDRIP? Hello, Karen. How are you doing? We're just waiting for the stream to begin here. While we're waiting, United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, UNDRIP, is a human rights instrument adopted by the United Nations General Assembly on September 13th, 2007. It sets out the rights of Indigenous peoples worldwide, recognizing their inherent rights to self-determination, culture, language, and lands. Key aspects of UNDRIP recognize Indigenous peoples' rights to self-determination, including the right to autonomy or self-government, cultural diversity and distinctiveness, language and education, lands, territories, and natural resources. Free, prior, and informed consent for development projects affecting their lands, emphasizes the importance of reconciliation and redress for past injustices and human rights violations, calls for the protection of Indigenous peoples' rights to their traditional knowledge and cultural heritage. It has been endorsed by 143 countries and has become a significant framework for promoting reconciliation and addressing historical injustices. Many countries, including Canada, have begun to implement UNDRIP principles in their laws and policies. For example, the Canadian government has established the Declaration Act in British Columbia, which incorporates UNDRIP as a framework for reconciliation. UNDRIP has significant implications for Indigenous people's lives as it recognizes their inherent rights and dignity. It also provides a basis for addressing ongoing issues such as land rights, cultural preservation, and economic development. As a non-binding declaration, UNDRIP serves as a moral and political commitment to uphold Indigenous peoples' rights rather than a legally binding treaty. Nevertheless, its adoption has contributed to growing international recognition of Indigenous peoples' rights and has inspired national and local efforts to promote reconciliation and justice. Sounds great, eh? But it's really not. And this is why. We're going to tell you why while we're waiting here. This is why it's not. You see, it all sounds like rainbows and butterflies, but it's not. Because this is what they're doing. They're using the paid, bought out chiefs, the corrupt council band, and they're using people who are not of the native bloodline to purchase status cards, and they're using things like UNDRIP, Bill C-53, to use these individuals to finally sign the land to the Crown and the UN once and for all. So as much as UNDRIP to the plain eye looks like, ooh, wow, reconciliation. No, reconciliation doesn't come this way. That it doesn't come by the form of money. This is not reconciliation. Reconciliation also does not come from people who are the third arm of the government. They don't get to make those decisions. So that's why our sister Angel is there tonight. Hopefully the stream starts here soon. I was trying to avoid us having this little lull in between. But I'm just going to pop off here for 1 second. I'll keep the stream going, obviously, but I'm just going to pop down here while we wait, and I'm going to get this shared around. Oh, here we go. Look at that. Boom.
Before we begin, I'd like to ask all senators and other in-person participants to
I'll make
consult
the
the
bridge.
cards on the table for
Fine.
guidelines to prevent audio feedback incidents. And please make sure to keep your earpiece away from all microphones at all times. When you're not using your earpiece, place it face down on the sticker placed on the table for this purpose. Thank you all for your cooperation. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation and is now home to many other First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples from across Turtle Island. I am Mi'kmaq Senator Brian Francis from Ebiquet, also known as Prince Edward Island, and I am the chair of the Committee on Indigenous Peoples. I'd like to now ask my committee members in attendance to introduce themselves, and we'll start on my left.
Yana Martin from British Columbia.
Nancy Hartman from New Brunswick, from the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people.
John McNair from New Brunswick, also from the unceded lands of the Mi'kmaq people.
David Arnott from Saskatchewan.
Paul Prosper, Nova Scotia, Mi'kmaqi territory.
Judy White, Catawba-Cook, better known as Newfoundland and Labrador, and the ancestral homelands of the Mi'kmaq.
Mary Coyle, Antigonish, Nova Scotia, Mi'kmaqi.
Margot Greenwood, Nihil from Treaty 6 territory, but I'm here for British Columbia.
And before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the Youth Council for the National Association of Friendship Centers, who are below here. So welcome. Nice to have you here. And today we'll continue our study to examine the implementation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act 2021, also known as UNDRIP, by Canada and First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Committee is hearing from witnesses to further refine its study topic. And with now, I'd like to introduce our witness, Major Elaine Etienne, President, and I apologize if I didn't get your name right. Thank you for joining us today, and our witness will provide opening remarks of approximately 5 minutes, which will be followed by a question and answer session with the senators. Now invite Ms. Etienne to give her opening remarks. And could I get your last name so I pronounce it properly? Etienne? Etienne? Okay, good.
Oui, bonjour. Je m'appelle Marjolaine.
Yes, my name is Marjolaine Etienne. I'm from the Innu community, Mashayaski, which is, of course, in northern Quebec. Honorable members of the committee, Mr. Chair, thank you for allowing me to address you on a subject that, as a president of Quebec Native Women, but also as an advisor to the UN Voluntary Fund for Indigenous People, which I hold particularly close to my heart, namely the implementation of the UNDRIP, United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. This declaration represents a global commitment to the recognition and protection of the rights of Indigenous people, including women, girls who face unique and complex challenges. I'd like to share with you a few observations and recommendations made by our association regarding the implementation of the UNDRIP in Canada and its federated entities. In order to do so, I'd like to talk to you about the General Recommendation 39, which can help you enormously steer the implementation in the right direction of this UNDRIP with regards to the rights of Aboriginal, Indigenous women and girls. General Recommendation 39 on the rights of Indigenous women and girls, adopted October 22 by the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, provides a legal framework and guidelines to ensure that individual and collective rights of Indigenous women and girls are respected and promoted in line with the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW. In summary, General Recommendation 39 aims to provide concrete guidelines to ensure the protection and promotion of individual and collective rights of Indigenous women and girls in all areas of their lives. Here are a few highlights. It's essential to begin by recognizing and combating systemic racism, which manifests itself in an intersectional manner. Indigenous women and girls experience intersecting discriminations, being a woman and being Indigenous, while exacerbated by other factors such as sexual orientation or disabilities, but also specific experience of marginalization and vulnerability. The committee must assess these dynamics to better understand and combat this form of racism, which is intrinsically linked to the alarming rate of violence suffered by Indigenous women and girls. It's also crucial to consult and ensure participation of Indigenous women themselves in the decision-making process of policies, programs, and projects that affect them. This must be done in keeping with the principles of free, prior, and informed consent. The land rights of Indigenous women and girls must be guaranteed in order to preserve their autonomy and culture. The committee should examine the challenges it faces in terms of access to land, protection of Indigenous knowledge, traditional knowledge, and involvement in natural resources management and the protection of their rights. In terms of access to essential services, the recommendation highlights fundamental rights of Indigenous women to equitable access to various services, whether it's education, health, justice, employment, training. It's imperative that these services are not only geographically and financially accessible, but also culturally adapted to their realities. We have to then make sure that the emphasis is placed on valorization and transmission of ancestral practices. States must also support individual collective empowerment of Indigenous women and girls. This includes investing in education, training, entrepreneurship, community leadership to foster their empowerment. In fact, the transmission of knowledge includes mother tongues, essential to Indigenous women, playing a central role in this transmission, which must be valued in order to protect the perpetuity of our ancestral knowledge. It's essential that this recommendation be taken into account and recognized in our policies by provinces and federal government, as well as its content directly linked to that of the UNDRIP. We invite committee members to read the document for their inspiration. As for our association, various projects in connection with the Government of Canada's action plan, we have several initiatives underway. We have initiatives linked to the advocacy for missing and murdered Aboriginal women and their reports and recommendations, MMIWG. There's also a project on leadership, stories of change and the promotion of individual and collective rights enshrined in the United Nations Declaration and Recommendation 39, which will run until March 2025. The organization of a symposium at the end of 2024 designed to validate a framework strategy for gender equity, will be a crucial milestone. In addition, the ongoing work of a research and development unit, which will be completed by the end of the year, will provide valuable guidance on research ethics in Aboriginal context. Before concluding, I'd like to mention that while efforts are being made at the federal level to integrate the declaration into the legislative framework, it has been said that at the provincial level, particularly in Quebec, we're dragging our feet. Without recognition and willingness to implement the declaration at all levels of government, there can be no real change. Since both legislative levels or orders of government on issues affecting Aboriginal people. Of course, implementing the UN Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People can't be done properly without paying particular attention to the specific challenges, realities, and needs faced by Indigenous women and girls. It's essential to recognize and respect their cultural identities, their cultural knowledge, and their unique perspectives. Thank you very much.
To questions from senators, and I'll invite Senator Arnott to open up with a question.
Thank you very much, and thank you for coming today, Ms. Etienne, and helping us out on this issue. I'm interested in your perspective on the implementation of the UNDRIP Act, and I'd like to know if you think there's been a tangible impact so far in your experience of the Act, especially with respect to communities that you know and represent, and has there been any significant benefit to Indigenous women so far? I'd also really like to know what you might say. You talked about the need to invest in education, and you talked about the importance of language. I'm just wondering what you could tell us about what you hope to see, what kinds of investment and what kind of outcomes would you like to see in 5 or 10 years? What's the end goal to address these issues? And I always like to talk about the intersectionality and the compounding effect of these categories of discrimination. And I know you've touched upon it. So just like you to make comments on those issues, if you would, please.
Ça fait beaucoup.
That's a big question. I'd like to begin by explaining a certain vision. What's very significant and important for Indigenous women and girls, as you know full well, prior to colonization of our traditional lands, we had great gender equity. Everyone had their role to play. With the onset of colonialization, residential schools, the Indian Act, totally upset the situation and context of the ancestral rights of our women. Our roles within the cultural community is that of the transmission of our knowledge, traditional knowledge, for future generations. And in 5 or 10 years, it'll be interesting to see that the women have regained their place in both Indigenous society and culture and the mainstream Canadian culture. We have a contribution to be made, whether it's in our community, in our First Nation, or in an urban context. When an Aboriginal or Indigenous woman is not in good health, the whole family is not in good health. I was saying that the situation is absolutely universal, global, as well as local, that we take a look at Section 22 of the UNDRIP that we cannot seem to achieve. There are some elements that have marked the lives of Indigenous women and girls Ms. José Chapuin, for example, who died and how she died. And I think that that's absolutely visiting all the First Nations in Quebec, and I'm visiting the whole Quebec group to see what's going on in the field directly. They do not feel safe. Safety and security is very important for both the women and girls and for the entire community. Recommendation 39, I think, is very, very important, and we have to use it as a source of. It was adopted in 2022 within the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. Now, I would hope that you would also accept and adopt this recommendation, whether it's in Quebec and Canada. It's fundamental. Within that recommendation, we can ensure that we can insist on our rights and regain them. So please use it, exploit this recommendation. I mention it often and consistently because we are meeting with Indigenous women throughout Quebec to see how we can do this. We do have rights. And in that sense, we have to educate, raise awareness as to what is this declaration, United UNDRIP, and what are our rights. People should be questioning themselves on that. How do you see this evolving? How can we implement them? How can they actually be realized? Because women have to be able to see that they can achieve this objective, not only within our communities, but also in rural contexts. And in 5 or 10 years, women will in fact realize, achieve these rights. And then they're looking backward, they'll see how far we have progressed. But we have to do it in society as a whole.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Etienne. I really appreciate your passion, and it shows. I'd like to talk a little bit about urban areas and Indigenous women living in urban areas. On April 17th of this year, the National Association of Friendship Centers testified before the committee, and they defined urban Indigenous as, First Nations, Inuit, Métis, living in small, medium, and large communities, but they also included rural, isolated, and remote communities. I'm wondering, does your membership include rural and remote communities? And that's important to me. I have a lot of Innu people in Labrador that I'm quite familiar with, and they live in remote communities. And I'm wondering if you could provide us some advice, if they're included in your membership, of how we can ensure that the urban Indigenous women living in remote areas have their rights protected. Big question, I'm sorry, but I'd love to hear your advice.
Femmes autochtones du Québec.
Well, as the Indigenous communities in Quebec, we represent 11 First Nations. Sometimes these people are to be found in urban areas, yes. They often displace themselves away from their home base for various reasons, to study, education, a lack of housing, adequate housing in our proper communities, and a better future for their children. So often they will exile themselves from their home community and settle up in an urban area. We also represent the Naskapi First Nations, Mi'kmaq to a certain degree also, Atskamek as well, Innu, of course, various First Nations across the geography of Quebec. And any decisions we take are done in consultation, of course. Women from various communities, regardless of which affiliation they have valid contributions to make. As to the geographic question, the Atikamekw nations, uh, 2 hours, 2 hours and a half from Ledoré. They're out in the bush, as it were. And their needs are very different, community by community, and unique, because at Mashayat, we're not too far from urbanity, if you will. We often have to leave our community to get our health care attended to. But for those in isolated or remote areas, it's well, there's no paved highways. It's all gravel roads, and it takes a long time. If they want to deliver a baby, they have to go out. Any problems, medical problems, or accompanying our elders, they have to leave the remote community to obtain services. And in urban areas, of course, they have better access. In isolated communities, it's much more difficult. We have to document. What we need to do now is to actually itemize, set up the information of obtaining, determining what the needs are, what are the requirements. They may be different from community to community, but in fact, there's a lot of commonality. How do we get in touch with them? How can we actually reach out to them? Well, each First Nation elects a representative for each new mandate, and these individual representatives can inform us of the actual situation in each community. In May 2024, our association, time's up. Oh, okay. So we mobilized 160 women from various communities of various ages of life. We discussed certain themes: climate change, governance, socioeconomic development. And these themes, these subjects were broad, of course, because we have a lot of concerns and we can't just concentrate on our specific day by day needs, but the report is being drafted as it is. We have a rough draft already, but that will give you, well, the government of Quebec at least will have a valuable tool to be able to seek out solutions for for our situations, and this based on the report.
Ms. Etienne. In multiple studies across the committee over the past several years, many witnesses have identified the lack of consultation and co-development on several matters, including an act to amend the Indian Act in response to the Superior Court of Quebec decision in Déjeuner, which is of particular importance to First Nations women and their descendants. Have you encountered challenges related to the way the Government of Canada understood or undertook consultation, cooperation, and co-development?
La consultation est un
Consultation is an essential, fundamental necessity in order to arrive at a recognition and a description of our actual needs, not only our aspirations. Consultation should occur constantly as to the needs of Indigenous women. And we have to be upfront about this, get ahead of the game so that how can we, in fact, consult and the co-development, co-management as well. You know, we are an afterthought when it comes to the process of consultation or co-development, regardless of under what theme we're dealing with. So we're not sufficiently proactive. It's rather reactive, whether it's a province or whether it's the federal government. When it comes to drafting a law or a policy, we have to be consulted on day one. We, you know, we have to be in the lead wagon, not the last of the caravan. You know, because otherwise we're faced with a fait accompli. We're put before a situation that's already a done deal. So what can we do? It says free, prior, and informed consent. So you have to do that before an action or an initiative is taken, not after. Recommendation 59 also mentions that if we want to talk about the issues affecting Indigenous women and girls, it can't be done after the fact. This is the way that we should be working together. This is how we collaborate as well as cooperate.
Senator Coyle.
Présidente Etienne. Really happy to have you. Je vais parler en anglais. Je peux essayer un peu, mais
I'm going to speak in English.
I was very impressed with a number of the things that you said. They really resonated with me. You talked about the fact that we, meaning the Indigenous women of Quebec, have a contribution to make, and that needs to be recognized. You said that it's important to look at the role of women, Indigenous women in Quebec, in the management of natural resources, as well as in the protection of rights. I'm very, and just now we're talking about free, prior, and informed consent. All of these things to me come together. Quebec, the territories within Quebec are abundant in resources, and some of those resources are very important for the future economy of that region and also for our whole country. Mining, particularly of critical minerals, hydro development. We know wind is going to be growing. I'm curious not just about the role of Indigenous women in giving their permission and then we're negotiating some kind of arrangement with somebody else who is the proponent, proposing projects to develop those resources. But I'm interested in else who is the proponent, proposing projects to develop those resources. But I'm interested in what's happening, if anything, where Indigenous women in Quebec are actually taking the lead and inviting others to be partners with you on the development of these resources, which are so abundant in your territories and which will be essential for the future economy.
Au niveau du territoire,
as concerns the territory, Indigenous women are there, they live there, they've lived there for years and years, and we will be there for decades to come. But on our territory, whether it's a hydroelectric project or a mining project, it's very significant and important that Indigenous women, and this I'm in fact being the messenger for what I've been told, and it goes back to 2022 with our project. They want to know more as to what is climate change. We hear about it all the time, but no one has ever explained to us what the consequences are, what the phenomena are of climate change. What will it mean in future? Our organization has a responsibility. We ensure food security and the quality of our food. We have to protect fisheries. We do hunt, whether it's rabbits or deer, large and small. We harvest wild foods, and we have to ensure that there is food security. Now, I forgot one important element, and that of our medical plants, for example, our traditional knowledge. In our strict, close environment, in our ecology, this is something that has to be protected. Not only protected, but promoted and used and transmitted as knowledge. There are very, very few fora where we can discuss among Indigenous women these issues. I've got nothing against men, of course, but big game, for example, sure, caribou, moose, deer, but yes, also for the berries and greens, herbs that grow in our communities that are available throughout our communities. Yes, to fish, medicinal plants, the quality of our waters. If you do a forest management plan, if the forest plan doesn't include the aspect, well, here there's a blueberry area, and they rip it all out. Well, that's one resource that we've lost. So we're there. Consultants will tell you, no, you shouldn't damage that area because we have some food needs there. So food security, water, small game, fishing. Women do this all the time, even big game, but mostly not. The biggest responsibility is the transmission of our native language. That's why we were born. This is the language of the territory is so vital. It, losing the language is a breach of contact, of connection. We had residential schools, the Indian Act. This absolutely undermined all the responsibilities of Indigenous women. I would sincerely hope that in 10 years, maybe less, we have to act now, recognize the role, the traditional role of Indigenous women, socially, culturally, specifically language. You have to recognize that. Our political leadership in our communities as well have to recognize this. When we are acknowledged, recognized as Indigenous women, there's a certain pride, confidence in that. We are ensuring the longevity, the perpetuity of our languages. But what is obstructing us, if we're talking about an access to information, this is where we're going to need some help and support because we have to reappropriate our roles. With help, with support, because, we have to regain our sense of value, of contribution, not only in the heart of the family, but for self-esteem, for self-confidence. I have a responsibility. I have my responsibilities as an Indigenous woman, and I have to fulfill those responsibilities. And in today's context, it's very difficult. We are still being obstructed because far too often we lose, literally, one of our Indigenous women because of violence in most cases. And who are the victims? Those who are left behind, our families, our children. So we have to ensure that Indigenous women can be revalued, recognized for what they have contributed and continue to contribute to the community, and can do even more in future. I believe in the strengths of our Indigenous women. We have the capacity, we have the leadership skills, but if we don't involve them in the process of using those skills, we'll always be the underclass, you know? You have to take your head out of the water. You can't live underwater all the time, but women have to surface so that we can prove to you we have the competencies and skills to have a happier, more prosperous, more convivial society and culture.
Senator Greenwood.
Yes, so I will speak in English. Thank you. Thank you for coming this evening. I just have in your opening remarks, you talked about the implementation of UNDRIP and that you are involved in some of those things at the UN level as well. So my question is really straightforward. When you think about your organization that you are the president of, and of course your experience in life in the province of Quebec, could you identify some of the actions that your organization or that you've seen that are trying to address the articles in UNDRIP? Now, you spoke this evening about a lot about recommendation 39. Are there others? Can you give examples of where you're making some progress in implementing some of those recommendations? Or perhaps it's actions you would like to see on some of them.
Je faisais référence à la déclaration des Nations Unies.
I was referring to the UN Declaration on the fundamental elements, of course. But in the declaration itself, there are very few specific articles, paragraphs dealing with Indigenous women. So I'd like to sort of highlight those items, those paragraphs or articles that highlight the equality of women, of Indigenous women. Not only internationally, it's in the United Nations Declaration, but as the Quebec Native Women's Association, we intend to use these articles, Article 39 in particular, which is already underway. We're already preparing something to make better use of it. We're going to be proposing a and we try we are going to be a policy framework to accommodate both men and women, Indigenous men and women.
Thank you, Senator Greenwood. That exhausts my list here. Is anyone else? Senator Prosper?
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, so much for coming before us this evening. I really enjoyed and appreciated taking in your testimony and the way you covered, so many of the key issues that Indigenous women that you know of face throughout your territory. And I want to sort of get to some fundamentals. I mean, because you have a very strong vision in terms of what you want to see.
You're our sisters, buddy.
Not just for Indigenous women, but it's also connected to families. It's connected to children. It's connected to the land. We're all part of this cycle. And you talked about consultation, and you said it's really essential, to have that done at the front end. You had this analogy. You want to be in the front of the caravan rather than not in the end. You don't want Indigenous people to be an afterthought or face a fait accompli. Decisions are already made, kind of thing. So what I'm curious about is, because we have UNDRIP, we have the action plan, and a key element of that is trying to align federal laws, regulations with UNDRIP. And so I'm curious, what is your experience of government officials, people in positions within government, approaching your organization and saying, we have this action plan and we want to talk to you, we want to consult, about, these policies or these laws to get your perspective, so, we can really deliver on this. Can you share any examples or stories or anything like that? I'm just curious. Thank you.
En 2000,
We're in 2024, was back in 22, 23, I think, 22. We tabled in response to a request for submissions as to issues of concern to Indigenous people. We received some financing for that. We were the first organization, women's organization, to be able to go out and consult Indigenous women and girls as well in their home communities. It was a first. It was a first in Quebec to obtain such subsidy, if you wish. So in 23, we toured the province to meet with these people in their communities in order to try and explain to them, understand what was this UN declaration. Well, Quebec, Montreal, the major cities, the urban centers, we know what UNDRIP is. UNDRIP. We know it's an international thing that comes from the United Nations. But when we get into the smaller communities where the message not getting through, and this is my milieu, and this is where I want to be to discuss with these Indigenous women, because I sincerely believe that our nations, our communities, our political leaders can one day have a self-government. We are the best placed to respond to the needs of our people. In the context of this objective, this initiative, we were supported by a number of officials that supported us financially for one thing, but also morally. They supported our vision. They could understand what we were trying to get at. And of course, it's step by step or it's one-off kind of initiatives. Now, I'll just put my cards on the table. We want not only a spontaneous one-off, but we'd like something structured and repeatedly. With success comes more success. So, it's not like you start a project and it's a project. You build something, and it's over. No, and then to create momentum, we need programs. It has to be recurrent. It has to be consistent. It has to be continuous. Because to simply recognize the declaration, okay, fine, we've accepted it. We hear it, it's discussed in New York or in Geneva, or we can use these fora to state our point of view. But recommendation or Article 39, we have to implement it on an ongoing daily basis. We have to try to implement it or integrate it into all our search for equality, for regaining our rights. So the programs should be long-term, multi-year, ongoing, so that women will grasp what it means and start to participate, not only be consulted, but participate.
Really appreciate what you provided just now, and and it makes so much sense. I mean, what can you really achieve on a one-off? The need to have something more structured, more consistent, to give you, as you put it, momentum. With success comes success. In terms of that structure, what kind of structure do you envision for your organization? That consistent, multi-year, structure that you think is rather key for your organization, for the people you represent?
Femmes autochtones a célébré en
Our association marked its 50th anniversary. We've had our successes. And of course, we've also had some less successful. And I would hope that we will have a long life expectancy as an organization. Our mission is to defend the rights of Indigenous women. That's our fundamental and central mission. We have begun in partnership with the universities of Ottawa, of Quebec in Ottawa, with faculty at the High Commission, the United Nations, some partnerships which currently are universities are offering summer courses, for example. And this year, we've met with Francophone natives, if you will, from Africa to discuss the issues of Indigenous interest. This is a first in Quebec. We created a bit of a network, this contact with partners. So there's a lot of partners. Quebec Native Women's Association, or Incorporated, cannot have to. We need partners. We can't do it alone. was it at the federal order of government, federal order, Quebec? Our association is not up to the task right now. Alone, we can't do much. We can shout, we can mobilize, but if we're preaching to the wilderness, as it were, uh, so we can't get too much accomplished. So we need partners. What kind of structure? Well, if we really want to see the advancement of regaining our rights, we have to have a programmed approach. We have to work collectively. Don't forget that at the heart of this is Indigenous women, and they are mostly the victims of violence in our communities and in the urban setting. And our concern, our preoccupation here, Indigenous women, and I deal with them constantly, is our youth, our children, our grandchildren. And with this perspective, to be working seriously, we have to do that. But at the same time, we have to develop the community with the leadership of indigenous leadership. We have created a program, a leadership training program for women, because the women are there. They want to be able to get this training and to be given the opportunities. And it has to be an ongoing process. When it recurs, when it's ongoing, when it's an actual program and not just a project, it can occur. Human capital is our most valuable resource, and we would be able to make them value added, as it were, better, stronger.
Thank you, Senator Prosper. The time for this panel is now complete, and I wish to again thank Ms. Etienne for joining us and presenting your testimony this evening. We really appreciate it. If you have any other submissions you'd like to make, you can submit them to the clerk within 7 days. So that brings us to the end of our meeting. The meeting is adjourned.
Wrong button. All right, so this is what's going to happen. For anybody who was lacking a little bit of context, Angel, actually, we had about, by the looks of it, 6 people in that room. I think Matt was there with his girlfriend as well, and Nick was there with the 2 row, and Angel had the staff in there right behind the lady as she was speaking. There's a couple shots there. I'm going to take a couple clips out of our live, a couple shorter ones to share around tomorrow. But what we are going to do is I'm going to cut this off because I imagine it'll be a few minutes, and then we'll be back one more time tonight, and we'll get some words from Angel and Nick and the others that were inside. It's too bad that they cut it off so quick. I was kind of hoping you might see maybe Angel stand up, but they didn't waste any time to cut that off. I wasn't sure how I've never watched a Senate proceeding before. I've watched lots of House of Commons stuff. It's unfortunate they shut it off so quick, but I'll get a hold of them right away here, and we'll be back as soon as we can here. Even if we don't come back to comment with them, I'll come back one more time to kind of give you guys a review after I speak to them. If they don't come on, I'll just be on Facebook. So I won't bother doing all the StreamYard. It takes a little longer for me to set it up. And if we're not bringing anything on the screen, I kind of prefer doing lives on Facebook because you get to see the reactions and stuff. It's just a little easier. So I hope you all have a good night. I appreciate everybody tuning in. This was pretty cool. I don't think there's been a traditional talking staff inside the Senate of Canada in a very long time, if ever. I'm gonna have to do some digging on that tonight. But this is something that when I was speaking to Angel every morning, it's check in with Blaine, check in with Angel, check in with the team. We kind of have that's just the way it goes. We're completely transparent with one another, and the team makes team decisions. And they're like, should we do this? And I was like, damn right you should do this. So they followed proper protocol. They called Graham and Nancy. They called Debbie and Nancy. We were both on the phone. They called the Mohawk elders. Blaine, same thing. Got the protocol. Okay, mobilize, go. This happened in a matter of 5-6 hours. We can do whatever we want, ladies and gentlemen. We just have to start working together. So, love you all. We'll see you back here one more time tonight.